No, you don't need the.
I'm doing this my way.
He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend.
Talking on it though, then
He a
you're gonna
legend.
it up later.
Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of Item. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of Item.
What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and in today's video, we're going to talk about golf in pertains to the meta. We're going to talk about Jatt's tier list, and we're going to talk about my tier list. I published my tier list weeks ago, so I don't want to be accused of copying anybody. But before that, I wanted to just give some feedback on what I heard today from the dive and from Jatt on JLXP. So in general, I have a very low opinion of the dive and a high opinion of Jatt. But here's what I wrote down. If you want to hear reasons for rankings and crutch arguments, and to learn what the public thinks and the prevailing narratives, etc., listen to the dive. It will tell you what the buzz is in the community, and overall, that's very valuable. It's important to understand the prevailing narratives when looking at books and thinking about making bets. That's part of the reason why it's valuable to put out a tier list so early. I try to have my thoughts out before you hear it from other places, because between that amount of time is when you could potentially find value on the sportsbook. In the LCS, I don't think we found much value because I think it was pretty easy to kind of see how things should lay out. And it doesn't mean that it will end up the way that we have our tier list set up. But that's when you want to take that opportunity, is before the big names come out with all their content for the season. And then the last thing I wanted to say was, we should always look for bad reasons to push against from those kinds of videos, from JLXP or from the dive, even if they end up being our original opinion. If I give a reason for liking a team like Evil Geniuses, right, and then the dive gives reasons for liking EG, just because we like Evil Geniuses doesn't mean that we both like them for the same reasons, or that we're both wrong for the same reasons. We can both be wrong, but for much different reasons. And that's kind of what I wanted to get at. So before we get into the actual tier lists and I start talking about Jatt's tier list, he put out a well thought out video. He's a pretty thoughtful person. I like his content. I like watching it, but I don't agree with his tier list, and I'm going to go through why I don't agree with his tier list. But before I do that, I want to talk about golf, which is also related to Jatt, because Jatt is like a golf enthusiast. And apparently he's a very good player. I think he's like a low single-digit handicap. For those of you who don't know what that means, it's pretty good. That's like a legit player. He's not a professional level by any means, but he's a good player, which is interesting. So what I wanted to talk about was golf in relation to the meta that we see in League of Legends. And the reason I think this is important is because a lot of people want to take a look at the names on a roster and just say, these players are good or these players are bad, and here's how it's going to relate to their team's power level for an entire year. If you've been watching my content for months, if not years, you'll recognize that I often talk about this going into international events, world championships, into different splits. I try to identify when the meta is shifting and how it might impact teams before the public really catches up to it. And I think it has a lot to do with golf. It's very similar to golf. And the main reason why it's similar to golf is because of talent. And this is something, again, that I keep pushing on the channel. Talent over everything. The most important thing you can do is find players that have immense talent. I was watching or listening and watching to the dive, and they were talking about somebody like Solo. And they're like, oh yeah, TSM brought back Solo. He'll be such a good player to have on the team. A good player for what? If your goal is to have a team that's going to go out there and not get embarrassed consistently, then okay, you can have a player like Solo. If your goal is to win the league, you cannot have players like Solo be an important part of your roster, and you just can't. And if TSM goes out and wins this split, that'd be hilarious. Good for you. It's most likely not going to happen. The reason why I think it's important to talk about talent and why I think golf helps understand it is because in golf, there's a handicap system. And the handicap system in golf is very similar to the ELO rating or MMR rating that you'll see in chess or League of Legends or other games that have competition, right? The difference is that in golf, I guess it's somewhat similar. In golf, once you become a professional, it's not really that important what your handicap is because your handicap is kind of off the scale. I'm a 9.1. That's the best handicap that I've ever had. Someone like Jatt is a 4. So what that does is it gives you an understanding of your skill level relative to the golf course that you're playing. And not every golf course is equally difficult. In basketball, soccer to a lesser extent because field sizes actually do change, but in a game like basketball, football, the fields don't change. It's always the same thing. League of Legends is a continuously evolving game, so the quote-unquote shape of the field is always changing, and the skills that you need to be successful change depending on the game state. I'm not saying the shape of the rift would impact how players play, but in golf, it really does have a huge impact. For example, I play most of my golf at a public golf course, and it's a good course for the amount of money that you have to spend, but it's not a difficult course. If I go to that course, I can shoot in the low 80s, maybe I break 80, and that's a good round for me. If I go to a more difficult golf course or play the course setup the way that a professional would, I would get dominated. I would be horrible. I probably wouldn't break 90, and there's a chance that I wouldn't even break 100. And I know that it's tough to understand unless you're familiar with golf. But the equivalent, or the reason why it's relevant to League of Legends, is because when you go into a game of League of Legends, or when I go into a game of League of Legends, we can pick the same champions, we can use the same abilities, we can get a similar number of kills, we can do a similar amount of damage. In golf, you might use the same golf clubs as a professional player, but you don't hit them the same way. It's much more obvious in a sport like golf because the way that you can measure it is so much different. In League of Legends, anybody can go into a game of League of Legends and get 20 kills. You can't just randomly go out there and hit a 300-yard drive. It's just not going to happen unless you're a freak athlete. So the reason I say that is because when we think about the different regions in League of Legends, it's like playing very different golf courses. The LPL is a treacherous golf course. There is water. There's water trouble on every single hole. If you mishit a shot going into a green, maybe it flies off the back of the green, ends up in water, something dangerous like that. In the LCK, it's a little bit less punishing in general, but there are a couple holes that are very difficult, and those are the top teams in the LCK. Then in the LEC, it might look like the LPL or the LCK a little bit more than the North American golf course, but it's still not the same caliber. And maybe there's like that one hole that keeps bringing you back to the LEC. Like maybe it's that one really good team that is performing well for any given stretch of time, like G2 in 2019. But for the most part, when you go to that golf course, unless it's a very difficult setup for that day, you're going to be able to deal with that hole. North America is like my public golf course. It's much easier to play. The reason why this still relates to League of Legends is because if you took a professional golfer and you put them on my public golf course, they would destroy the golf course. They would shoot an ungodly low number. They'd be in the low 60s probably without breaking a sweat, literally and figuratively, because they're playing golf. Which is a joke. I do sweat when I play golf. It's a nice walk. It's good exercise. If you don't like extreme physical activities, you might actually enjoy golf a lot. It's nice to be in nature. It's nice to play golf in general. But that's what I'm getting at. So when people want to talk about the talent levels in different regions and the talent level of different players, we talk about players in North America like Doublelift or Bjergsen, and we want to talk about them as if they're playing a difficult golf course. They're not playing a difficult golf course. They're playing a public course. Almost anybody can go play it. It's really nothing special if you're winning in the LCS. It might be, fun for the fans. It might be good for branding. All those things. There is some value to that. But at the end of the day, League of Legends should be about winning on the international stage, and I think that's what we lose sight of. So I want to get into Jatt's tier list at this point. But before I do that, actually, no, we're going to go straight into it. So we're going to talk about the tiers that he has set up. I'm going to show his tier list now. So it's a little grainy, but he has an S tier, A tier, B tier, C tier, and D tier. And he also has an F tier, but there's no team in the F tier. So first up, he has TSM. TSM's roster is Solo, Boogie, Maple, Neo, and Shine. And he has them in last. I have them in last as well. Not a big deal. His reasons for not liking them are much different than mine. I don't like them because I don't think they have a team that's going to be competitive this year, but I also downgrade them because I don't think they're going to have a team that's competitive in any year. This team is not going to stick around as a unit and advance and become something. Jatt's more focused on the LCS. I'm more focused on its relative position globally, and I think that TSM is the worst team in the 4 major regions right now because of that balance. They don't have any future prospects, but they're also not good right now, and that's a bad combination. Next up, Jatt has Immortals. I also have Immortals in 9th place, and they're just not a good team. Every time you hear me talk about Immortals, you hear me say, their team's idea was to build around Revenge. Revenge is a mediocre top laner. He's not good. You shouldn't be building your team around a player who's not good. Ablaze Olive. I like him. He's a cool guy. I don't want him on my team. Tactical. Interesting player. Has good upside from a playmaking perspective. I don't want him on my team. Fleshy. Don't know anything about the guy. Sorry. And Kenvi. Interesting upside. Maybe he can turn into something. But we don't know what his ceiling looks like yet. And maybe we never will, because sometimes if you're a good player on a bad team, all you will ever be is a good player, never a great player, because you don't show up in the big moments because your team isn't there. Let's keep moving. And this is the first team that I think that Jatt has wrong. So he has Golden Guardians in the D tier, and he thinks that they are effectively the 8th best team. I think that Golden Guardians is the best out of the bottom 5 teams. Licorice, River, Gory, Stixxay, Huhi. A lot of the same arguments that we want to apply to teams like Dignitas also work for a team like Golden Guardians. I think if we're comparing Licorice and Armut, I think that Armut's time in the LEC was good. He had some good performances. I think he's overrated. I don't think he's much better than Licorice. River against Santorin. River's a better jungler than Santorin. I don't really have the time to explain that here. Maybe I will in another video. Gory is better than Jensen. Gory has experience in much more difficult regions, and whether or not it works out in North America, we shouldn't trick ourselves into thinking that Jensen is the better player. Has Jensen had some moments? Yes. The reason why he was in those positions is because he qualified for Worlds because he played in a lesser region. If Gory played his entire career in North America, he would ultimately be a better player than Jensen. He's a more talented player than Jensen. Is there a possibility that language barriers and things like that hold this team back? Yes. Does that mean that Gory is a lesser player than Jensen? No. And again, we go back to the golf analogy. If you took Gory and put him on the LPL golf course or the LCK golf course, or took Jensen and put them there, Gory would perform better in the more difficult regions. He would be the better player in the more difficult conditions. And that's the most important thing. That's the easiest way to kind of justify how we're thinking about these players. You might be delusional and think that Jensen could go to LCK or LPL and be a good mid laner. It's just not the case. And to be fair, Gory was not a great mid laner in either of those regions, but Gory has talent that is interesting to those types of teams. He wasn't on one of the top teams, which makes him look like he's on a Dignitas level team or a CLG level team relative to that region. But you're forgetting, it's relative to that region. It's still better than what we have here in North America for the most part. Let's keep moving. Next up, CLG. Jatt has them 7th. I have them 8th. Dokla contracts Palafox, Luger, and Poom. And Jatt talks about this as this is going to be a test of what does it mean to bring back a team. What is the value of continuity? And again, we go back to the golf analogy. Continuity means nothing when you have a professional player, a true upper echelon professional coming to your course and playing. It was fun when you were playing the club championship and, maybe you made it a couple of rounds and you snuck into the semifinals or something like that, but eventually you lost to a good player from your golf course. That's like CLG playing against like evil geniuses. Like you're playing against the good players from your region, the Jojo Pyuns, players like Danny who are unfortunately not playing right now. And then you have these guys. You have Dokla, Contracts, Palafox, Luger, Poom. None of those players are special. Maybe Luger has good upside. Maybe. But at the end of the day, they're not going to be competing for the top spots. Maybe they can get a lucky first round victory, second round victory in the club championship, but they are not going to the finals and winning. They might even make it to the finals in less than 1% of the situations or scenarios. They will not win. They are not good enough to win. People want to point to their performance against C9. Was CLG playing really well or was Cloud9 underperforming? I think it was a little bit of both. CLG was playing at the upper end of their range of outcomes, and they still lost to Cloud9 in that series. If you have to point to a match that went 5 games as their shining moment, but it was a 5-game series they lost, you can't be serious. Let's keep moving. Dignitas. So for Dignitas, we have Armlet, Santorin, Jensen, Spawn, and Ignar. And overall, I think that both the Dive and Jatt were pretty fair when it came to Dignitas. They understand the appeal of a lot of these players, but they're not super excited. The one thing I was really surprised about was that they all said, oh yeah, Spawn, okay, whatever. Spawn's 24 years old. I don't understand how something like that happens. Could he be better than a lot of the other options? Sure. But I would rather take the lesser player who's younger, like a 17 or 18-year-old, that could actually turn into something. And I can use them for play them for multiple years and have them as a part of my organization, help turn them into the next good talent in North America. You will not do that with Spawn. If Spawn ends up being better than Prince, FBI, Berserker, Jan, Luger, Tactical, then I'll probably stop making videos because I just won't understand what happened and I'll just have to call it quits. Now let's get into the top 5 teams. And for the most part, everybody has the same top 5 teams. We both have 100 Thieves in 5th place. Tenacity, Closer, Bjergsen, Doublelift, Busio. Apparently they're not doing very well in scrims or something like that. I don't really care. I like the Tenacity idea. I like the Busio idea. The one thing that both of these videos or podcasts or whatever you want to call them kind of spoke to is that they're taking the quote-unquote evil geniuses approach by taking two young players and putting them onto a roster with older players. That is false. That may end up being the result. That's what the team looks like at the end point. Inspired is not Closer, Bjergsen, or Doublelift. Inspired is a young player. He's a very young player. He just happens to be talented. Danny was a very talented player who just happened to be young. Jojo Pyun was a very good player who just happened to be young. That's the difference. Tenacity and Busio, whether or not they are young, 100 Thieves should be making these selections because they think that they're good right now, not because they're young. I don't think that 100 Thieves are playing them for that reason, and I don't know why people are using that narrative. I just think it's a mischaracterization of what's going on, which is fine. Next up, we have FlyQuest, and this is the thing that I think that Jatt got the most wrong, obviously, because the rest of the teams kind of are ranked very similarly. But this is the big problem with big public figures putting out tier lists and stuff like that and talking about the strength of teams. And I understand why he might want to have some skepticism about Impact, Spica, Vikla, Prince, and Isla. Apparently, Isla's not in the country right now. They're using Winsome. But all the news that's coming out is that Fly is doing very well in scrims, which shouldn't be surprising because League of Legends is the common language. I mean, we've heard people talk about that in the LEC, the LCS. I've been talking about that for years. If you go into a game, turn off the voice comms, watch what's going on, you'll be able to figure out basically what's happening in the comms for the most part. It's just that in the moment, you want the reassurance of your teammates being positive and things like that. So it's kind of a bizarre thing that could be holding this team back. Impact is a top laner. Spica is a very good jungler. He's probably a top 3 jungler in the region. I'm not sure why people lose sight of that. 3 or 4, depending on the performance of a split. He's a former MVP. I've always been really high on Spica. Yes, TSM was bad with Spica last year, but it's still Spica. Vikla, 19 years old. This is what's important. Vikla is a young Korean player who is going to have every chance to succeed because he has a good team around him, and that's going to be the difference between a random mid laner who comes to North America and a player like Vikla. Vikla had good performances on KT Rolster, who is it's a pretty good organization in general. They're generally mid-table team that has difficulty playing against the upper echelon teams, but Vikla shouldn't have big issues playing against Bjergsen, Gory, Jensen, Palafox, Ablaze Olive, Maple. Will there be good matches between Vikla and Jojo Pyun? I think so. People are talking up Diplex right now, Harry, cool. And if Gory ends up turning into something, I wouldn't be shocked just because he has somewhat of a pedigree. There were a couple different good organizations that wanted to use him, including FPX, who is very good at talent evaluation in general. But I think Vikla comes in and he's instantly one of the 3 or 4 best mid laners in terms of higher end outcomes. Then we have Prince. Prince should probably be thought of as the best AD carry in North America because of his talent level. And again, going back to the golf handicap system, based off of his performance in the LCK last year, we should think of Prince coming in as a +6. He is 6 shots better than the average golf course, which is, it's a lot. I know it might not be hitting for a lot of you people, but scratch is 0. I'm a -9, meaning I'm 9 shots worse than the golf course. He's 6 shots better than the golf course. He is playing a different type of game than I am, and that's just the reality. I don't have any problem saying that. And then we have Isla or Winsome, whoever it'll be in the beginning of the season. There's no reason to think that a support, especially Isla, who has come into a professional team in the past and has performed at a decent level, there's no reason to think that will submarine an entire team. And this team is pretty young in general. Spica is pretty young. Vikla is pretty young. Prince is pretty young. Isla's pretty young. They're all, I think, 22 or younger. It's just that Impact is 26, 27, 28. I don't know what the exact age is, but he's something like that. And he's still a good player. He still has good performances. He played well at Worlds last year. There's no reason to think that Impact can't play well with this team. Impact is Korean. Vikla is Korean. Prince is Korean. I think Isla and Winsome both speak Korean and maybe are Korean as well. That's a good recipe for success. If Spica is the one holding them back in the spring, I'd be shocked. But guess what? If he is, you get rid of him. You bring in a Korean-speaking jungler, even if it's a step down talent-wise, you blend it all together. They're going to be pretty good. I have them as my number 1 team. Next up, Team Liquid. Summit, Piosik, Harry, Yun, Core JJ. It hurts my heart not to have Piosik higher. I just can't really get them much higher. Summit is a good player. Piosik's a good player. Core JJ is a good player. It's just I don't know anything about the mid laner or the AD carry. Everybody wants to talk about their work ethic. Cool. Guess what? Your work ethic isn't really going to matter when, in my mind, FlyQuest and EG are just more talented than you. There is a limit to how good you can be, even if you have the perfect work ethic, because although a work ethic in many ways is just kind of natural to someone, and you either have a good work ethic or you don't, it's tough to learn. It is possible to learn. It's not possible to give someone talent. You either have talent or you don't. Sucks to hear it. It's the truth. Then we have C9. Jatt has C9 as the 2nd team in the region. I have them as the 3rd team in the region. Fudge, Blabber, Diplex, Berserker, Sven. Good team. I don't have any problems with them. I think that they'll be pretty good. And then EG, he has them as their number 1 team. I have it as number 2. Someday Inspired, Jojo Pyun, FBI, Vulcan. So this is my tier list. And one thing you might notice right away is that I don't have an S tier. I don't have any of these teams in the S tier. I do have an S tier. But my rankings are global. I'm trying to compare these teams to everyone in the 4 major regions, because that is much more important. I don't want to pretend like the LCS has FlyQuest or EG and they're S tier teams right now, and we should expect them to be good the entire year, and then we're going to get to World and they're an S tier team, and Gen G is an S, or not Gen G, T1 is an S tier team, or Damwon is an S tier team, and they're both S tier teams, so it should be a really close match, and they're both at Worlds. That's not true. They're not the same kind of thing. Now, Could they be the same thing? Could they both be in the S tier? That's a possibility that we have now that we didn't have in the past. The reason why it's a possibility is because now we're seeing a consolidation of talent onto a couple of teams that may actually be able to compete with the international teams. I don't think that Cloud9 has that upside. They do have Berserker, which maybe he has that upside. Maybe Blabber does. Maybe Fudge does. I don't know anything about Diplex, and I don't think that Sven really has it as a support. It's really not as important for Sven to have it. But those are the question marks. Someday Inspired, Jojo Pyun, FBI Vulcan. I really do believe in Inspired. I really do believe in Jojo Pyun. Someday has been a very good player for a long time. FPI is a good player. Hopefully he fits in well with the team. Vulcan, good but not great. So I'm a little skeptical with how far EG can go. If EG has a good spring split and they bring in Danny, I'm saying they're an S tier team, and I would love to watch them at a world championship. I think that they could shock a lot of people. Maybe not make the DRX run and win a world championship, but go far in the knockout round, because when you have players like Inspired and Jojo Pyun, you really have something special. Which again, you might completely disagree with the talent evaluation. I'm pretty good at talent evaluation. I always find these players a little earlier than the rest of people. I'm not saying I'm the first one to discover them, because obviously they're on professional teams, but you have to kind of see the correct things when you're watching games and not get overwhelmed when they have a bad performance. You need to mostly pay attention to the good performances, because those are the ones that show you the upside of a player. But at the end of the day, I think that FlyQuest has the best ability to turn into an S tier team, and it's because Spica can be a very good jungler. Vikla and Prince could be very good players in their positions. And I think for somebody like Prince was arguably the best AD carry in the LCK last summer, because he was on a team that didn't have as much talent around him. Now, it's not like he was on a team with no talent. Sandbox was a pretty good team in general. I think if you put Prince onto their roster right now, it would be scary. Like, they'd be a very good team. I have a very high opinion of Sandbox. In general, I just think that they are going to be a little bit less consistent than a team like FlyQuest, because I do think that FlyQuest right now is better than Sandbox. I'll give you my international. Ranks for all the LCS teams, I guess. So we'll just go from the bottom to the top. So TSM I have as the 47th best team, which is the worst team in the 4 major regions. Immortals is 46, CLG is 38, Dignitas is 37, Golden Guardians is 36, 100 Thieves is 27, and I think that 100 Thieves might have a little bit of upside if they hit the jackpot with Tenacity and Busio, but probably not going much higher. Team Liquid, I think, is the 15th best team in the world right now. They have a lot of good talent on that team. If Harry and Yun turn into anything resembling average players, they are going to be competitive in the LCS, and they're going to go to Worlds, or they have a chance of going to Worlds, and seeing how far they can push themselves at an international competition. Cloud9, I have them a little bit better. They're 14th. I have EG at 12th, and I have FlyQuest at 11th. And I know that's very consolidated. It doesn't do justice to the gaps I think that there is between potential talent on these rosters. But as time goes on, it'll kind of get fleshed out. In regards to the tiers, a D tier team is a bad team that has no future. So it's not only are you bad right now, it's that I think you're going to be bad for the rest of the year, and that there's no reason to run it back next year. C tier teams, I think best case scenario is that they can compete in their domestic region and maybe take a round off of one of the teams that are above them. A B tier team is a league average team, but has a realistic chance of turning into something, is like building towards something in the future. So I think 100 Thieves, the fact that they have Tenacity and Busio, they could just be building for next year. Maybe that's good enough, and maybe that'll be an interesting thing to watch next year, but I'm skeptical how far they can go this year. For the rest of the teams in the LCS, I think that they all have very good chances of being at the top of their league. I don't think that they all have very good chances of being competitive internationally, and that's really the difference. And then we have the S tier teams, who I think are the ones who have chances to win the world championship. Right now, I don't see that for any of the North American teams. If we see a very good split, then maybe I change my mind. But my justification in the future isn't going to be, FlyQuest played really well against Evil Geniuses. I think they're a world championship contending team. It's going to be about like how do their players and champion pools fit the meta that we are in? How flexible can they be in the future? And what will that look like on the world stage? And then you have to compare matchups against the other teams that'll be at an international tournament and stuff like that. Because remember, I did have DRX winning the world championship last year. I didn't say that they were my favorite to win the championship, but I had a bet on them and I won money on it. Did you win money on it? I bet you didn't. So that's basically it. I wanted to get my thoughts out there. The LCS is starting this week. I'm very excited. I love watching the LCS, even though it's a lesser region. It's my home region. I kind of have to like it. I kind of watch it out of sympathy, I guess, maybe. But the games, for the most part, a lot of them are boring. But those clashes between the top teams, it is pretty fun to watch. And it's a sad state that, you know, the LEC, the LCK, and the LCS all have that, basically, where there's 4 or 5 pretty good teams. Everybody else really sucks. But that's just the reality of the situation. The LPL in general is more watchable. There are more teams who are competitive, but, you know, don't want to complain too much. It's fun to watch League of Legends from around the world, and I love watching all the regions for different reasons. So that's all I've got for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.